Welcome along. Keir Starmer has obviously had enough of people swearing him at the races or dealing with sleaze scandals involving his wife's frocks. He's been to Italy to see how they've managed to reduce illegal immigration. But there is a problem for Starmer. Do you remember when he said this?
I'm worried about the far right. I'm worried about populism and nationalism and the politics of the easy answer, the snake oil, if you like.
Yeah, well, it turns out that the really right-wing Italian government has actually got it right. Here he is now, sucking up to Meloni.
Made remarkable progress working with countries along migration routes as equals to address the drivers of migration at source and to tackle.
Yeah, so you just know, don't you, that if the Italian leader was a Tory politician in Britain, Starmer would be saying what an inhumane, soulless criminal she was. In the run-up to the election, Sir Keir Starmer kept telling us,
I think that we can smash the vile gangs that are running this trade, that are making a fortune putting people into boats and breaching our border security. I'm not prepared to put up with that, and that's why I think the serious answer is to smash the gangs.
Well, it turns out he obviously didn't actually have a plan. And now, GB News can reveal that human traffickers are openly laughing at him. We can exclusively tell you that people smugglers are putting on an illegal migrant ferry service, picking them up from various different points along the French coast. So it's not just Calais and Dunkirk. They are genuinely going along the coast, picking people up like an Uber service, OK? And they are doing pickups in Ambleteuse, Wissant and Sangatte. And this allows them to squeeze around 80 people onto a boat. The smugglers communicate using encrypted messaging services, and they'll do several stops along the French coast before setting off out into the Channel and then waiting for Border Force to come and get them. 801 people crossed on Saturday. That's the second highest daily total this year. Germany's closing its borders and ramping up deportations. Italy is essentially turning boats back and has agreements with third countries. Both of those nations seem untroubled by the ECHR. Our Prime Minister doesn't even really want to call it illegal immigration anymore. It's irregular now, isn't it? There's no deterrent anymore. Starmer said he'd smash the gangs. In response, the gangs have set up a ferry service. They clearly don't fear Keir. Let's get our thoughts from my panel this evening. We've got sketch writer and columnist at the Daily Telegraph. It's Madeline Grant. We've got journalist and broadcaster Benjamin Butterworth and the ex-chairman of the Tory party, Sir Jay Berry. Jay, I will start with you and work my way down. So there is now an illegal migrant ferry service on the coast of France. So that's good, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I wish you were making it up. I mean, you actually couldn't make it up. This crisis, which, in all fairness to Keir Starmer, he inherited. He hasn't created this, to give the man a bit of slack, is just getting worse and worse and worse. And I think part of that is driven by the fact that he came into government, huge mandate given to him on the 4th of July, saying that he had a plan to smash the gangs. Well, what's he done so far? He's redefined illegal migration to irregular migration, as you say. So what? But things that do matter is we had passed a law saying that if you come to this country illegally, you'll never be given asylum. That's been overturned. We had a well-advanced plan to send people to Rwanda before Benjamin comes in. I know that we hadn't sent any, obviously we sent a couple, but they'd volunteered to go. But in fact, it was there. Now the German government, apparently, we read in the papers, is looking to adopt that plan and use the accommodation paid for by the British taxpayer as its biggest deterrent. And, all of the deterrents have gone. And now we see him going over to see Giorgia Meloni. When I first he was going over to see Giorgia Meloni, I thought he'd taken up his role as a prosecutor because she, under his definition, is far right.
Well, this is it.
In Britain, she'd be sent to prison for the policies she has. He now wants to copy them.
So he went to Germany and he said, progressives of Europe unite. And about 2 days later, Germany basically shut the borders and started ramping up deportation.
And picked up the Rwanda policy.
Picked up the Rwanda policy. And now he's gone to Italy, who I am convinced that Keir Starmer, by his own definition, must think that Meloni's far right.
It's pretty wild, actually, how out of step with the rest of Europe we are, including governments that are actually socially democratic or centre-left are taking much more drastic action to deal with this crisis because they know how the public in their countries feel about it. And another thing that's come out of the meetings with Meloni is that Keir Starmer is said to be quite tempted by Italy's plan to process migrants in Albania. saying it's not OK with Rwanda, but Albania seems a much better proposition. It's something that they're actively considering. I mean, it doesn't surprise me because fundamentally, until we can get to the bottom of the push and pull incentives, then nothing will change. Nothing will change, and we will continue. The taxpayer will continue to be mocked in this way by these, ferry trips going across the coast of France.
I mean, this is just a completely ludicrous situation, isn't it? And it's impossible for the French to now defend against this because you've just got migrant pickup points along the coast. They get them all in these boats and they ferry them out across into the channel. I mean, Keir Starmer was saying to smash the gang. The gangs don't care, do they, Benjamin?
Well, clearly not, because they've been doing it for years. The number, 801 in one day is a lot, but it's no different to the last year or the year before that. So I really don't buy this idea that they're flicking through the Labour manifesto, deciding when they're going to pop over to Britain. I think that's got nothing to do with it. And frankly, criticising him for working with Giorgia Meloni is absurd, because it's his job to work with other democratically elected leaders, or not democratically elected. That's his responsibility as the British Prime Minister. So it's nothing like if she were the Conservative leader or something like it. And they appointed a new head of a task force only today, I think.
Oh, great.
In order to smash these gangs.
Yeah.
But look, the idea of what people like Sir Jake's party had, that you can just shout at the French and say, I want you awful, and somehow they'll want to work with you, clearly that was pretty flawed.
But the thing about the border force is that it's basically identical to a very similar force that the Tories had before that was just called a different name. And Keir Starmer has just renamed this department and says, we've done something brand shiny and new. And you haven't. You've just replicated the ideas of the last government. But
it has got a new head, of course, who was in charge of locking everyone up during COVID. So let's see how he does manage it. Well, exactly. Well, it did work. So let's see how he does with
your government that did that.
But let's see how he does locking up people who are crossing the channel. Look, I think what really sticks in my craw is this idea that they've abolished Rwanda, which is very well developed, and planes subject to going through the courts were going to... Well, it may have been expensive. I don't think it's any cheaper to process people in Albania. We hear that the government's thinking about Morocco or Tunisia as places. The country doesn't matter. The principle of offshoring people as a deterrent is something that now the Labour Party has been forced to admit. They admitted it today. The Home Secretary said they were open to it. Is something that works. If it works, why did they cancel Rwanda when we'd already spent all of the money to set it up? And in fact, Rwanda was better because if you were successful in your asylum claim, you stayed in Rwanda. What Giorgia Meloni in Italy do is if you succeed, you come back, in that case, to Italy. And it won't work while we have a civil service and Home Office that waves through 90% plus of people who apply for asylum just come to Britain. So that's no deterrent. We should have stuck with Rwanda, Benjamin.
But, I mean, it's wrong to say that Labour's changed its position, because it never opposed processing people in a third country. It was about deporting them there. That was the case before the election, and clearly they're still looking at it now. And also, you say the fact that we accept 90%, well, then by definition, they're not illegal migrants. They have had a legitimate, upheld claim to be here. And if you want to change that system, well, then you change the rules of what qualifies as a refugee.
There's no such thing as an asylum seeker from France. They are not fleeing persecution. France is a safe country. They are from France.
They're not. They're in France.
Well, exactly. So why don't they claim asylum in France?
They're not coming over with a baguette.
And you can't blame the French. And frankly, if you were a French politician and you had thousands of people in Calais, off you go. Britain this way, soft touch this way.
Massive sign for Dover.
It's our job as the British government to stop people coming to this country illegally. And I don't think Keir Starmer's cutting the mustard.
The true dishonesty is any politician that tells you that you can just fix this, because you can't. And I think in the decades to come, this will become a bigger problem, not a smaller problem, because the ability to cross the world is getting easier, the structures, the technology is making it easier, and also there is things like climate change that are making swathes of the world unlivable, and those people are going to go somewhere. And I think politicians should be more straightforward about that.
I would just say that Australia had a policy of pushing back the boats and processing everyone far away from the mainland, and it worked rather well. I mean, I'm not saying that we're obviously a lot closer to continental Europe than Australia is to the various islands that surround it, but I don't think it's fair to say that no country has ever solved this or got to the bottom of it. It just requires being harsher and firmer.
And Italy's done it. 62% drop in the number of migrants coming to Italy in the last 12 months. They've done that.
They went to other countries.
But we are out of step, aren't we, in actually quite an astonishing way, considering we're the ones who voted for Brexit as a country. We voted for Brexit. Huge part of that, for a lot of people, was borders. And now you look at Germany potentially shutting the borders, ramping up deportations, what Italy are doing now. we wouldn't be able... Starmer's wanted to stop us doing any of that stuff in this country consistently, hasn't he? And now he's going over there going, goodness me, you know what you're doing there really works. Yeah, it's mad.
Well, I think it owes most of all, actually, to the fact that other countries in Europe predominantly have some kind of proportional representation, which means that politicians that are not insulated in the same way that we are by first past the post from people's true feelings about stuff. So it means that often you have parties of the radical right that are there gaining ground in their parliaments, and it means that the parties of the centre right and the centre left have to listen. They can't just afford to ignore those desires, whereas the first past the post system insulates our politicians from the true feelings of the electorate.
Yeah, it does. I mean, that's the Loveless landslide, isn't it? That's what getting booed and called a banker at Doncaster races looks like when you've got a majority of goodness knows what. You know, there's that discrepancy there, isn't there? Really. Do you think that Starmer is? I mean, is he going to copy Maloney? Is he? Do you think what's the upshot of this actually going to be? We're going to work more with the Albanians. Is that what you think?
That's certainly the signals coming out of them today. But I think we might be a bit more inventive, because Albania, it's taken some time. There's been a challenge. There was historically a challenge in the Albanian parliament against this, because guess what? People who live in Albania don't want all these people sent there. So I think the most likely thing is that we will copy the policy, but do it somewhere like Morocco or Tunisia or another North African country.
Okay.
I mean, Albania is very sparsely populated, so, you know, they've got plenty of space.
So is France. Why don't they stay there?
I mean, look, we already have to deal with the boats and Albanians coming here being sent back to Albania. That was already a success. So clearly there's a precedent for the two governments working together. And Albanians tend to be rather fond of the Brits for our history 25 years ago, helping their people. So I wouldn't say it's impossible.
Yeah, I mean, I think from memory, the Albanian leader is worried that Albania's losing too many men. That they're leaving.
But they mainly go to Germany. There's a huge brain drain up to Germany from Albania and Kosovo and those countries.
Well, there you go.